New York people were talking about that over the summer. You know, Nas and Rakim on one joint, and then it's not on the album. What happened?
I know. Nas, Rakim, damn. You know, it pains me to say this right now. You know, I fought and I fought. Streets of New York was just incredible for me. It's an incredible moment in my history. You know what I mean?
Heartbreaking news about Alicia Keys no one was ready for. What if the woman who taught the world how to fall in love, the global icon behind 15 Grammys, was quietly living through a nightmare that makes her toughest song sound like a walk in the park? You thought you knew everything about Alicia Keys. You thought you saw the complete picture, the flawless vocals, the glowing skin, the unshakable marriage, and the Hollywood fairy tale. But what if I told you that overnight, behind closed doors, a brand new update just dropped that changes literally everything we thought we knew about her? Gossip blogs are erupting, industry insiders are whispering in dark corners, and the internet is left completely speechless. We are not just talking about another petty social media argument or a quick red carpet wardrobe malfunction. No, this is the kind of explosive, heartbreaking revelation that threatens to tear down a multi-million-dollar empire built over 2 decades of blood, sweat, and classical piano keys. For years, she managed to keep her deepest scars buried under a radiant smile and anthems of empowerment. But right now, as leaked details start surfacing and anonymous sources finally break their silence, the carefully constructed image is fracturing right before our eyes. Is this the ultimate betrayal from someone in her inner circle? Or is the past finally catching up to R&B royalty? Buckle up, because the truth behind this breaking scandal is far darker, far more bizarre, and way more heartbreaking than anyone was ever prepared for. To understand how a pristine, bulletproof legacy begins to show its first fatal cracks, you have to stop looking at the polished album covers and look at the financial machinery operating behind the curtains. For over 20 years, the public was sold a very specific narrative about a humble piano prodigy who conquered the world through sheer talent and spiritual purity. We were taught to believe that while other pop stars were busy chasing cheap thrills, spending millions on diamond chains, and getting embroiled in sleazy tabloid sagas, this particular queen was sitting peacefully in a candlelit studio, meditating on harmony and universal love. But according to a massive stash of leaked internal memos, encrypted financial ledgers, and whistleblower recordings currently circulating among top-tier entertainment lawyers, that soulful, grounded persona was actually the most expensive and calculated marketing campaign in modern music history. It turns out that behind the organic, raw aesthetic was a hyper-aggressive corporate syndicate operating out of offshore shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. These newly exposed documents paint a picture of a relentless financial machine that didn't just participate in the standard music industry greed, but actively engineered artificial market scarcities and manipulated royalty distribution pipelines. Anonymous industry accountants are now alleging that for over a decade, millions of dollars meant for session musicians, background singers, and co-writers were systematically funneled into private holding entities masquerading as charitable trusts. One leaked audit report reveals a bizarre paper trail where non-profit foundation funds, explicitly raised for inner-city youth music programs, somehow ended up financing private jet charters, luxury estate renovations in Switzerland, and high-stakes speculative crypto investments right before the market crashed. When you dig into the backstory of how this empire maintained its pristine reputation for so long, the hypocrisy becomes almost breathtaking. Remember the iconic era when she famously renounced makeup and declared war on societal beauty standards? The media fell over itself to crown her as the ultimate champion of natural authenticity, writing endless think pieces about her revolutionary bravery. But according to several former personal assistants who have broken their non-disclosure agreements under the condition of strict anonymity, that entire barefaced movement was actually born out of a bitter, failed corporate endorsement deal with a major cosmetics conglomerate. When the multi-million-dollar contract negotiations collapsed over her team demanding an unprecedented percentage of global sales, her brand strategists scrambled overnight to flip the narrative. The viral, revolutionary lifestyle shift was reportedly nada more than a spite-driven PR pivot designed to sabotage her former corporate partners while launching her own line of absurdly overpriced skincare products that ironically contained the exact same synthetic ingredients she had publicly condemned. The plot thickens when you examine her long-standing reputation as an unbothered, peacemaking matriarch in an industry built on petty rivalries. While she was giving inspiring speeches about female empowerment and uplifting other women, behind closed doors, her legal team was reportedly executing aggressive hush money settlements and enforce at all costs non-disparagement contracts that would make a corrupt politician blush. Industry insiders are now revealing that multiple upcoming female artists who dared to sound even remotely similar to her classic tone were quietly slapped with aggressive cease and desist letters, effectively blacklisting them from major streaming playlists and terrestrial radio stations before their careers could even take off. Top executives from competing record labels are whispering that her team used mob-like intimidation tactics, threatening to pull her headline festival appearances if organizers dared to book younger, rising female piano ballads on the same stage. And then, of course, there is the dark, absurd reality of her private lifestyle, which stands in stark contrast to the modest, spiritual image presented to the public. While fans were shedding tears over her anthems celebrating hard-working frontline heroes and struggling single mothers, leaked internal logistics schedules reveal a level of cartoonish, megalomaniacal diva behavior that rivals the most notorious rock stars of the 1970s. We are talking about mandatory backstage riders demanding that entire green rooms be recarpeted with organic virgin wool for a 2-hour stay, custom temperature-controlled humidifiers filled exclusively with imported Scandinavian glacier water, and an explicit ban on venue staff making direct eye contact with her while she walked down backstage hallways. Former tour managers claim that if a hotel room didn't feature a vintage Steinway grand piano tuned precisely to a specific historical pitch frequency within 20 minutes of her arrival, entire hotel management teams were threatened with career-ending lawsuits. Public reaction to these first leaked documents has been an absolute bloodbath of shock, anger, and hilarious disbelief. The internet, which spent 2 decades worshipping her as an untouchable saint, is currently having a collective meltdown as social media platforms are flooded with memes, mocking video essays, and angry fan rants. Longtime supporters who bought every album, attended every stadium tour, and bought into the spiritual wellness branding are feeling profoundly cheated, realizing that their money was directly funding the very corporate greed their favorite artist pretended to stand against. Comment sections under her old music videos are rapidly transforming into digital battlegrounds, with disappointed fans re-contextualizing her most famous lyrics as prophetic warnings about her own hidden duplicity. But as bad as these initial financial and branding exposures seem, they are merely the tip of a massive, terrifying iceberg, because the financial corruption was only being used to cover up a much darker, highly illegal shadow operation that was taking place within her most intimate personal and professional relationships. As independent investigators began pulling on the loose threads of those leaked offshore bank accounts, they uncovered a bizarre web of shell corporations that led straight to a series of shady, unrecorded late-night transactions involving high-level music executives, international art brokers, and political fixers. It turns out that the financial irregularities were not just simple tax evasion or greedy royalty hoarding. They were part of a massive, multi-layered money laundering pipeline designed to clean vast sums of untraceable capital generated from illicit underground art auctions and high-stakes illegal gambling rings operating out of luxury penthouses in Manhattan and Dubai. Anonymous sources from within federal law enforcement agencies are now whispering that her name has appeared multiple times on wiretap transcripts, discussing coded asset transfers under the guise of acquiring rare, priceless musical instruments and ancient classical manuscripts. The sheer scale of this covert operation is mind-boggling when you realize how many prominent figures were quietly dragged into the net. Promoters who thought they were simply wiring performance fees for international arena shows were actually routing funds through complex layered accounts that bounced through Zurich, Frankfurt, and the British Virgin Islands before landing in private accounts controlled by her closest inner circle. Legal experts examining the paper trail note that the sophisticated structure of these transactions required an army of high-priced corporate attorneys, forensic accountants, and rogue bankers who spent years constructing an impenetrable wall of plausible deniability around R&B royalty. When news of these deep-level financial investigations first began leaking into music industry group chats, the immediate reaction from her core management team was pure, unadulterated panic. Internal emails sent during the early hours of the morning show high-ranking executives screaming at each other in all-caps text, scrambling to burn paper records, wipe encrypted hard drives, and draft emergency non-disclosure agreements with astronomical payout offers for anyone willing to keep their mouth shut. But the dam had already burst, and no amount of corporate cleanup could stop the flood of dirty secrets from rushing into the light, setting the stage for an unprecedented wave of public fallout that no one saw coming. The immediate aftermath of those initial financial disclosures triggered a chaotic domino effect that rapidly spread into her personal life, exposing a web of psychological warfare, broken marriages, and toxic studio dynamics that makes high-profile Hollywood drama look like child's play. While the public was still reeling from the revelation of offshore tax havens and fake charity funds, a secondary vault of leaked text messages, audio recordings, and confidential marriage counseling notes was dumped onto an encrypted file-sharing network. These files completely dismantled the carefully curated narrative of her blissful, harmonious household, revealing that her high-profile marriage was less of a romantic partnership and more of a cold, transactional business alliance built on mutual extortion, creative theft, and staged public appearances. For over a decade, the couple was marketed as the ultimate power duo of the music industry, a match made in hit-making heaven where legendary hip-hop production met soulful classical piano mastery. Their joint interviews were filled with nauseating displays of affection, gushing about spiritual connections, blended family perfection, and endless creative synergy. But according to the leaked audio files from inside their private recording studio in North Hollywood, the reality behind those closed, soundproof doors was a nightmare of screaming matches, smashed equipment, and bitter fights over song credits. On one particularly disturbing tape recorded during the production of a multi-platinum album, you can hear a furious argument where she explicitly accuses her producer husband of stealing entire chord progressions and rhythm tracks from obscure, uncredited underground producers in South Africa and crediting them to himself to collect millions in publishing royalties. When the producer retaliated by threatening to reveal her secret use of vocal pitch correction software and ghostwriters on her most famous acoustic ballads, the argument escalated into absolute chaos. You hear the distinct sound of a grand piano bench being thrown across the room, followed by her screaming that she made him relevant again after his career had hit a dead end. Former studio engineers who worked those grueling 20-hour sessions have now come forward, confirming that the atmosphere was so toxic that sound crews had to sign daily liability waivers and non-disclosure agreements just to hand over microphone cables. They describe a bizarre dynamic where the couple refused to speak directly to each other for months at a time, using junior studio interns as human relays to communicate basic instructions like turning up the monitor volume or passing a glass of water. Even more shocking are the detailed logs from their former security personnel, which outline how their famous blended family image was meticulously engineered for maximum social media engagement and brand monetization. The cheerful family vacation photos in Europe, the coordinated red carpet outfits, and the inspirational co-parenting books were reportedly staged operations managed by a team of public relations strategists who scheduled affection down to the exact minute for optimal lighting and paparazzi placement. According to these leaked logs, as soon as the camera stopped flashing, the couple would immediately split up into separate armored SUVs, heading to entirely different hotels or private estates on opposite sides of the city. The entire domestic bliss narrative was nada more than a lucrative brand asset designed to secure multi-million-dollar endorsement deals with luxury fashion houses, home decor brands, and family-oriented streaming platforms. The fallout from these personal exposures quickly metastasized into a massive creative crisis that threatened to destroy her remaining catalog of iconic hits. As word spread through the music industry that the soulful queen was facing imminent legal and financial ruin, former collaborators, songwriters, and backing musicians began coming out of the woodwork to claim their piece of the falling empire. A group of over 30 session musicians who worked on her early career-defining albums filed a joint class action lawsuit, alleging that they were forced to surrender their writing credits and publishing rights under severe emotional distress and threats of being permanently blacklisted from the recording industry. They claimed that famous piano hooks and soulful melodies that were sold to the world as her personal, late-night emotional breakthroughs were actually composed by broke, desperate studio musicians who were paid a flat rate of $200 and a box of cheap takeout food. Among these legal claims is a particularly devastating lawsuit filed by a former classical piano instructor who alleges that she plagiarized her most famous signature song directly from an unreleased student concerto written in the late 90s. According to the court filings, the instructor had submitted the classical composition to her early management team in hopes of securing an arrangement deal, only to be flatly rejected and told the music was unusable. Months later, a slightly rearranged version of that exact same melody was blasting from every radio station across the globe, winning multiple Grammy Awards and generating tens of millions of dollars in revenue, while the original composer was left completely broke and uncredited. The lawsuit includes forensic musicology reports comparing the two tracks note for note, proving a striking 90% mathematical similarity between the chord structures and melodic phrasing. While the music industry was digesting these staggering claims of creative theft, the digital world was turning into a complete war zone of outrage, ridicule, and relentless mockery. Internet sleuths and pop culture commentators began dissecting her past interviews with a magnifying glass, unearthing hundreds of hilarious contradictions, fake accents, and blatant lies she had told on late-night talk shows over the last 2 decades. Viral compilation videos showing her preaching about humility while wearing a $300,000 diamond necklace, or talking about organic living while being caught on camera stepping out of a gas-guzzling private jet, accumulated tens of millions of views within 48 hours. The very same public that had elevated her to sainthood was now taking immense pleasure in watching the pristine pedestal crumble into dust. To make matters infinitely worse, her desperate attempt to contain the damage through a series of emergency social media posts backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Her public relations team drafted a bizarre, overly emotional 5-minute video response that was uploaded to her official channels in the middle of the night. Wearing no makeup, a faded sweatshirt, and sitting at a dimly lit piano, she attempted to address the allegations by singing an improvised, tearful song about forgiveness, media persecution, and standing strong in the storm. But instead of evoking sympathy, the video was instantly recognized by viewers as a manipulative, tone-deaf PR stunt. Within hours, the clip became the most downvoted and mocked video on the platform, spawning thousands of brutal parody videos, auto-tuned remixes, and relentless meme templates that mock her attempt to sing her way out of serious corporate fraud and creative theft. Behind the scenes, the stress of the collapsing empire was taking a devastating toll on her inner circle, causing long-time advisors, managers, and personal staff to turn on each other in an effort to save their own skins. Senior executives who had spent decades covering up her financial irregularities and personal scandals were suddenly hiring their own criminal defense attorneys and leaking sensitive internal documents to federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity. In a series of frantic, leaked text messages between her head of security and her business manager, the two executives discussed the terrifying reality that federal agencies were preparing to execute search warrants on her private residences and corporate headquarters in New York and Los Angeles. As the walls continued to close in from every conceivable direction, it became abundantly clear that this was no longer a temporary public relations hiccup that could be swept under the rug with a clever interview or a charitable donation. The combination of federal financial investigations, massive class action copyright lawsuits, and the complete destruction of her authentic public persona had created a perfect storm of devastation. The legendary career that took 25 years to build on a foundation of soulful authenticity and untouchable grace was unraveling in real time, leaving her isolated, hunted by the law, and stripped of the very fanbase that had fueled her rise to global stardom. But as terrifying as the creative and personal collapse was, no one was prepared for the jaw-dropping criminal charges that were about to be officially unsealed by federal authorities. The unsealing of the multi-count federal indictment sent seismic shockwaves through the highest corridors of the global entertainment industry, transforming what started as a messy internet gossip scandal into an unprecedented criminal crisis. Federal prosecutors, backed by joint task forces from the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, and international financial crime units, officially announced a sweeping array of felony charges that read like a Hollywood crime thriller. The charges range from grand conspiracy and wire fraud to racketeering and multi-state tax evasion, detailing how her sprawling corporate empire allegedly functioned as a sophisticated front for a multi-million-dollar illicit enterprise. At the absolute center of the criminal indictment is the shocking allegation that her international concert tours were systematically utilized as a global money laundering conduit. According to federal court filings, ticket sales data, merchandise revenues, and private sponsorship deals across dozens of international stadium dates were systematically inflated and manipulated. Millions of dollars in untraceable cash, allegedly generated from underground luxury arts smuggling operations and high-stakes illegal gambling rings, were laundered directly through ticket distribution platforms and fake production expenses. Federal auditors discovered that vendor invoices for stage lighting, pyrotechnics, and international freight transport were routinely marked up by over 500%, with the excess cash routed back into offshore accounts held under fictitious names in Liechtenstein and Panama. The government's star witness in this unfolding nightmare turned out to be her former chief financial officer, a high-level corporate accountant who quietly struck a plea bargain with federal prosecutors after facing 30 years in prison. The whistleblower provided authorities with over 2 terabytes of encrypted data, including recorded phone calls, text messages, and detailed spreadsheets detailing the exact mechanics of the financial fraud. In one particularly damning audio recording submitted as trial evidence, the artist can allegedly be heard explicitly directing her financial team to burn physical receipts, alter internal audit logs, and lie directly to federal investigators regarding foreign bank accounts used to purchase rare, unrecorded real estate assets in Southern Europe. As the gravity of the criminal charges became public knowledge, the corporate backlash was immediate, ruthless, and absolute. Multi-million-dollar global brands, luxury fashion houses, and tech conglomerates that had spent decades featuring her face on giant billboards across Times Square and London's Piccadilly Circus scrambled to sever all ties within hours. Massive endorsement contracts were unilaterally terminated under strict morality clauses, and her signature skincare and wellness lines were abruptly pulled from retail shelves worldwide. Streaming platforms and radio syndicates, terrified of public backlash and potential legal liabilities, quietly removed her classic tracks from flagship curated playlists, causing her daily streaming numbers and royalty revenues to plummet by an unprecedented 80% virtually overnight. The financial hemorrhaging didn't stop at lost endorsements and tanking royalties. It quickly spread to her real estate portfolio and personal assets. Federal authorities executed court-ordered asset freezing orders, seizing her primary luxury estates in New York and California, along with her fleet of custom armored vehicles, private aircraft shares, and a priceless collection of vintage grand pianos and classical music manuscripts. High-profile civil lawsuits began raining down from every direction as former business partners, stadium venues, and insurance underwriters rushed to recover hundreds of millions of dollars in damages before the federal government claimed total forfeiture of her remaining assets. Public reaction to the unsealed criminal indictment shifted rapidly from casual internet amusement to genuine, profound horror and outrage. The music community, which had historically viewed her as an untouchable beacon of artistic integrity and moral elegance, was left completely paralyzed by the scale of the alleged criminal enterprise. Longtime fans who had used her ballads as soundtrack music for their weddings, graduations, and personal milestones expressed a deep sense of psychological betrayal. Social media platforms were inundated with millions of posts discussing the terrifying disconnect between her uplifting, soul-nourishing anthems and the cold, calculated criminal machinery that allegedly operated beneath the surface for decades. In a desperate bid to stave off immediate arrest and public imprisonment, her legal defense team scrambled to file a series of emergency motions, attempting to post an astronomical $50 million bail package backed by foreign assets and remaining music publishing catalogs. However, federal prosecutors forcefully opposed the bail application, arguing in court that the artist posed a severe flight risk due to her extensive network of international connections, private aviation resources, and undisclosed foreign bank accounts. The courtroom drama escalated into a tense standoff as the judge ultimately sided with the prosecution, ordering her immediate remand into federal custody pending trial, leaving R&B royalty sitting in a cold, sterile holding cell wearing a standard-issue orange jumpsuit. As news of her detention flashed across every major global news network, the scene outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan turned into a chaotic media circus. Hundreds of news crews, paparazzi, and distraught fans gathered behind police barricades under the flashing red lights of law enforcement vehicles. The stark, surreal image of a 15-time Grammy-winning global icon being led through the courthouse doors in handcuffs marked the definitive, tragic end of an... The fallout from this catastrophic fall from grace has sent permanent shockwaves throughout the entire entertainment landscape, forcing major record labels, talent agencies, and corporate sponsors to completely overhaul their oversight mechanisms for top-tier artists. Industry analysts predict that the scandal will lead to unprecedented forensic audits across the music